Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Today we're looking at one of the hottest design trends for 2015, and we'll get started in just a couple of minutes here. I'm Vicki St. Clair, and I'll be your moderator for the next 60 minutes. And before I introduce our guest speaker, I have just a couple of quick points to mention. First, for those who aren't familiar with Aquent Federal, Aquent's a marketing, communications, and design company, and they've been providing innovative solutions for some of the world's biggest and best brands for more than 25 years. And Aquent Federal, as the name implies, partners directly with government agencies and leaders. And they work in strategic communications, marketing outreach, visual information, and creative services and solutions. They're sponsoring today's webcast, and if you go to YouTube and type in Aquent Federal, you'll be able to see some of the other webcasts in this series. Following our guest speaker today, we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So at any point during the presentation, you can go ahead and type in your question into the chat box, and I'll collect them as we go along and make sure that they're answered before we leave today. We try to get off at 2 p.m. Eastern, but sometimes we run a little long. If you do need to leave before then, not to worry, the recorded webcast will be posted on Aquent Federal's YouTube channel. Okay, let me go ahead and pull up our guest speaker here. It's nice to put a face to a name, but since we're talking about responsive webcomics today, you'll see Steve has his image as a comic, which I really like. He's the studio manager for UX and design with the Office of Digital and Design Innovation. As a specialist in international design and user experience, Steve and his team are on the leading edge of what's new and exciting, and you can see here that right now his team's focused on emerging storytelling tools for journalists. He's also a graphic designer and fine artist, so if you're visiting galleries in the Washington, D.C. area, you might just run into some of his paintings. Stephen Jukes, welcome. We are so pleased to have you here today.
Oh, thank you very much. It's good to be here, and it's great to be talking about comics today. What I'd like to do is sort of talk a little bit about my agency before we get started. I work for the Broadcasting Board of Governors, and we're a little bit unusual. We're a small agency, and you may not have heard of us, but you have probably heard of our brands, and that would be Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, the Voice of America, the Middle East Broadcasting Network, and Radio and TV Marti. Together, those media outlets broadcast worldwide, both in TV, radio, and digital, in over 60 languages. So it's a very fascinating place to work. And in the Broadcasting Board of Governors, and more importantly, my office basically supports these broadcast entities in innovation, and most importantly, finding emerging audiences, which we're finding out basically is mostly mobile. My office, the Office of Digital and Design Innovation, does basically mobile news apps. We do storytelling prototypes. We create and maintain affiliate tools, and then on occasion, we try to get around censorship because we are broadcasting to a number of closed countries and closed societies, including North Korea, China, where things are really under control, obviously Iran. So it's one thing to put together good content. It's another thing to target people, but the final part is actually getting that message through past all the censorship. So that's a pretty daunting challenge. When my offices came to think about comics, there are basically three things that we're interested in comics doing for us. It's a way to enhance communications across cultural and language barriers, because as I said, we're broadcasting news and information to all of these places in the world. So that's kind of a specific thing for BBG to do, but I think as government entities, we're all looking for interesting ways to tell stories, and we're also all looking at small devices, because worldwide we are headed towards a world where even children have a mobile device in their pocket, and that's in the developing world. and the non-developed world as well. That we're headed very quickly to that world where everybody has these individual digital devices on their person at all times. Why government comics? Well, obviously, we need to go where the audience is. And as I was telling Vicki earlier, I have two grown children, 27 and 24. They have never owned a television in their life. They have a screen for games and other things, but they do not consume broadcast media. They consume media on demand. And they're very interested in the news, but they're much more likely to get it through web outlets, through YouTube, through a Google search, rather than going through a brand like NBC or CNN or even BBC. So we're looking at this very splintered audience, and you need to go, and we all need to go where the audience is. The other thing is that comics still are relevant to this group. They love comics. They talk about comics, and comics is not kid stuff to these people. It's a real and viable and actually kind of cool way to communicate. Now, the other thing I need to tell you is in doing research for this, the government has a rich history of comic books. So this is Dennis the Menace Takes a Poke at Poison, done for the Public Health Service, the Health, Education and Welfare, and the Food and Drug Administration way back in 1951. What's interesting about this is it's a Dennis the Menace comic, but it is actually aimed at adults, and Dennis even says it here. And I think this is like one of the things that comics do in an entertaining and not terribly scary way. They can talk about serious stuff. In this particular case, way back when, Dennis is talking about poisoning in the home and making sure that you keep your kids safe from all the various toxic things in the house. This is back in 1965. This is an Al Capp comic, Little Abner and the Creatures from Drop Outer Space. And basically this is talking about dropouts, high school dropouts, and encouraging them to get involved in the U.S. Department of Labor's Job Corps. And another example, and this is probably my favorite, Bert the Turtle says duck and cover, festive and easy ways to survive Holocaust, nuclear Holocaust, put out by the Federal Civil Defense Administration way back when. This is Bert the Turtle basically giving advice to children to duck and cover and keep themselves as safe as possible from bad things. In a nutshell, a comic book is text and pictures in a panel, and the panels basically unfold in a particular way. So 1, 2, 3, 4 panels. And what we can do is we can think about a comic book as taking those panels, which are actually fixed on a printed page, and letting them move in a div tag. So basically we're taking all the text and the words, and instead of putting them in a printed panel, we're putting them in a div tag, and then we're letting them move around on a column grid to basically adapt to people's devices. So in this example, we've got a 6-column grid, and this is way I put together a comic basically made out of div tags that are styled in a particular way. And for a desktop or a landscape tablet, the user would come on and they would see this basically arrangement of these div tags on this page. But with our cascading style sheets and our device calls, we can go ahead and move basically those items around so that they look like this on landscape phones or a tablet. So let me go back and you can see how things going here. So for the tablet, basically it's just a matter of reordering things and stacking them in a different way. But for the most challenging devices, and that would be phones, we can get our comic to do this. So if you look back at the previous example, 1 is a 1-column item, 3 goes across 4 columns, and in this particular instance, 1 actually goes up to the top. It becomes 2 columns, and everything falls in place below it in a linear fashion so that people can scroll up and down on their phones. And 3, which was 4 panels previously, becomes this 2-panel thing that basically tucks right underneath there. This is actually a copy of the actual text. My colleague Brian Williamson is here with me to talk about technical things, but he wanted to make sure that you all saw the code. It's not really all that hard. Obviously, everywhere there's a div, and they're panel 13, 14, and 15. They're basically all stacked up in the code. And the other option that you have after you stack and arrange these particular divs is the option to go ahead and put styles on the individual comic panels. So comic panels can include classes to add borders, tilt, panels, drop, shadows, and so on. And here we have the div class column 2 all with the software that we've got the way we've got everything set up right now. Wherever it says all, we basically go ahead and put a border around the entire div. Here's another one where we're basically talking about tilting panels. So in this panel, actually, we remove the border, but we can go ahead and tilt it left or right. This is the big pink panel, if you remember our mock-up, which is going across 4 columns. And that where you see panel column 4 is just the software call that's doing it. And then the other thing, so you can arrange all those panels, but then you can also add a drop shadow. And actually, kind of my favorite, you can actually put a rounded vignette on this very easily. So that's the pictures in your div container, but you've also got words, obviously, that go along with comics. And words can be styled in a couple different ways. They can be a narration, which is what's happening with the reverse text on the black square, or we can be inset into a panel, which is what's happening with the soccer players. And those are 2 options for text. You can also add a balloon to make things look a little bit more like a dialogue balloon, and that's what we're doing with the balloon bottom class here. And then actually we can also inset styles. Now you have to actually go ahead and do an inline style for that. But once you do that, what's great is everything moves together when you go ahead, and I'll be doing a demonstration of that in just a few minutes. And then the final thing is that you have is options. So insofar as fonts, in this particular example, we have dialogue, and the dialogue is actually Comic Sans, but it could be any font that you wanted. And then we also use in our example the class computer, which is actually monospace or Courier fonts. So those are all basic items that you can do. You can move the panels around in div tags. You can style the individual panels within the div tags, and you can add text and style that text within the comic. And so actually now I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and show you. So this is included in the slide deck, and this is actual live, the live comic text. And now when I'm talking about live text, this is actually text that sits and is live and can be styled and adapts with everything else when you make things adapt for the phone. So at its smallest, we go down like this. And remember, we were talking about this one panel over here, this first exposition panel, jumping up to the top on a phone, and then everything becomes one big, long, contiguous strip. And then actually, remember we were talking about the magenta panel being 4 columns long on the larger. It actually basically goes up and squishes down on the phone and gets smaller. But the other thing that you need to notice here is if you use live text, and that's the text that's sitting in the HTML, your font is sizing with everything else and staying large, nice and large on the phone. so it's adapting. So that's one of the things that's really nice about like using live text as opposed to drawn and hand-lettered text in your comic. Because we are who we are, we've ended up using the live text not for 508 compliance reasons, although that might be a reason for you to do it. We actually use it for translation, because all of our comics or all of our products should have at least the possibility of being translated into one of our 60 languages. Our initial concept was not a success for this. So, yeah, I think you can see there's soccer players in our demo, and we were originally going to use this as a go-around or workaround for FIFA. We were doing World Cup coverage, which was a great project, but FIFA is exceptionally difficult to deal with, and they have very draconian image and video rules. But we didn't use the comics in part because we started a little late, and comics take a long time. People really wanted photos, so we did end up providing a lot of photos, and we budgeted for that. And then the comics we felt were better for complex stories with adequate lead time. I will say, even though we didn't use comics in the final edition of the World Cup, we did use illustrations, and those actually turned out to be very popular. I think in part because it was a little different. So that's something else you can think about comics. They are a little different. Something that's a little different is going to stand out from the crowd. So we went looking for another opportunity to use comics. And here's the thing about innovations. It's always better to get customer and buy-in and client buy-in for new tools and processes if you can tie it to your agency's core mission. And our agency's core mission, one of them, as you remember, was getting around basically and circumventing these bad dark forces that are basically censoring people in various and sundry languages and various and sundry countries. So we were invited to work and do some illustrations for a circumvention project, and we thought these tools are not easy, they're complicated. So we thought that maybe by using comics we could give simple explanations to complex tools. And one of the things we did, we didn't do hand-drawn art, although we're a really unusual federal shop because we actually have illustrators on hand that can draw. We actually decided to use vector art in this particular instance because we could do a vector drawing of a bad guy, a villain in this particular case, and repurpose it across many of the comics. And then we also needed to support multiple translations. So once again, this is using live type and using Google Spreadsheets to feed text into the individual comics. And actually, once again, I'm going to go ahead and share my desktop, and we're going to go ahead and see the final result. So this is published by Voice of America. They were our client in this particular instance, and it's circumventing censorship. It's a live website. That's a section on the VOA website. We basically start off with illustration and a little bit of text, and we introduce the hard-edged Adobe Illustrator kind of illustration style. And then when we get down to the various tools, we actually have the responsive comic set up. So actually, if you notice the title block and then the fellow who's giving the sort of introduction, he actually sizes down really well for any kind of device. And here we've got Brian Williamson, my colleague, did a really clever thing with this speech balloon, in that it actually gets very much smaller. But once again, because it's live text, it all stays, it stays searchable. It stays really legible on all kinds of devices. We can go up here and look at Freegate. So once again, our little introduction guy is giving an introduction. And then we were talking about the style. So this is our bad totalitarian regime guy who's basically kind of trying to spy on this citizen of the world who just wants to find out stuff. And so you see we've used him throughout. And this is a way to kind of get away around some of the difficulties of comics, which are anything that's hand-drawn takes a lot of time. It's just the nature of the beastie. And there's our bad guy again. I'm going to actually go right back because Brian's reminding me I haven't shown a translation. So up here, we've actually had a translation field, and we'll go ahead and okay. I'm going to show Arabic. Okay, so this is the heavy-duty stuff. Arabic's a right to left, a very difficult font, and there you can see the real beauty of this is you've got this very flexible a translatable document that's going across the world. And as I said, this is all being run by Google Spreadsheets. So the contributors never need to touch the HTML. The editors never need to touch the HTML. Your boss doesn't have to touch the HTML. It's all being fed and loaded through a spreadsheet, which for my organization is an incredible boon. And if you have multilingual documents or websites, that's a really good way to run those kinds of products. So you have a choice when you're doing this. You can do the text in HTML, which is what I do, okay, but it's a little bit more complicated, but it makes the product truly responsible. It allows for translations through the spreadsheets. And like I said, it allows these non-technical guys to go ahead and contribute, simplifies, and since it's one spreadsheet, everybody's collaborating on the same thing, which is great, so there's no versioning problems. And then the only proviso I will say is it's possible to populate those spreadsheets with Google Translation. If you do that, please know that it's a start and not at all the final translation. There are so many nuances in these things that every product that we do, it always has editor or two editors and native speakers looking at things, not only for cultural translation, not only for literal translation, but also for cultural context, which is always important with languages. Or you could include the text in the image, and I have a sample of that here. And this is a comic done by the Guardian. Apparently, the National Health Service in England found out that most people die on the weekends, and basically in hospitals. And it's basically the cartoon talking about people checking themselves out of the hospital on the weekend and avoiding the hospital at all costs because they know it's a bad time. Now, as you can see, this actually has it all has all the benefits of basically using those hand-drawn characters in the image, embedded in the image, in that it's probably easier to do. But as you can see, it just doesn't scale as nicely, and it's not as nice small. Though I do kind of like it big. It looks kind of big, cool big. So those are your choices, and it kind of really all depends on what you're going for as a final project. But even if you do go ahead, like the Guardian, and do the drawing in the individual panels and actually include the text in the individual panel as a drawing, be aware that you do have the option of moving those panels around to adapt to people's devices, which I think is actually a really important thing. So what kind of subjects work best for comics? You can, if you think about it, you're going to spend a fair amount of time doing this. Actually, it reminds me of making a lasagna from scratch. You go ahead and you make the tomato sauce, and you cook the noodles, and you stack everything up, and you cook it for like an hour or so, and when it comes down, basically everybody will sit down, which is good and it's bad. It's bad because you spent a huge amount of time and resources doing it, but it's great because everybody wants it. So when you're approaching your subject, I would think about things that work and that are going to have a long shelf life, like your history. I'm sure that your government agency, if it's not, if it's more than 20 years old, probably has a fascinating history that's really good for PR. Biography. There are probably famous people associated with your organization doing important things that people really ought to know about. Biography is really good, in part because the older and further back you get, the fewer photos you have, and the photos or the materials probably are things that people have seen again and again and again. And doing drawings or illustrations of these old things makes it kind of come alive again in a different way that illustration can only do. The other thing that works really well are complex processes like the circumvention products. I haven't seen, particularly anybody do applying for something for the VA in an online comic, but I don't see any reason why it couldn't be done. If you were to diagram and walk people through a complex process, I would probably go ahead and use the live type and the HTML, and that way you could have a number of people or stakeholders kind of oversee their Google Doc or their sections on the Google Doc and make sure that everything is totally accurate. So if you're going to spend the time in doing a process, you want to go ahead and make sure that you can update and adapt it, and the Google Doc is very good for that. The other thing, and you'll find this if you go and talk to comic producers, in the last 25 or 30 years, there's been this big push on personal stories. People tell these incredible personal stories in comics now. And I would think that would be good for someone like NIH, who's like talking with possibly children or young adults, people who are kind of in a sort of sensitive sensitive kind of population about tough things. I could see where you could have an introductory comic or comic interludes in an online presentation about various and sundry diseases, especially things that are ongoing or problematic like diabetes. These are things that liven things up, that keep people interested, and like Dennis the Menace, kind of give you bad news in a kind of a more palatable way. Those are all things that I think actually would work fairly well. If you're interested in looking at some samples, there is a fair amount of comics for journalists, but I was trying to find things that might be more appropriate for people in the government. Brian found this great publication, District Comics. It's an unconventional history of Washington, D.C. It's a book, not an online comic, but it provides really kind of interesting histories. Some of them are very serious. Some of them are kind of playful. And it shows a bunch of different comic treatments, different comic illustration treatments. So this would actually be a very good resource for you to go through. Sit down with your team and say, well, if we have 5 pages, what could it look like? They're also pretty well written. And writing for comics is a different animal. I mean, a lot of times you have to show things. We have the option to show things rather than tell things, and sometimes it's more effective to show things, and sometimes it's more effective to tell things. So those are all kind of decisions that you have to make as a comics creator. This is a good sample of people probably doing a really good job with kind of local history. So if you're from the Washington, D.C. area, it's a good read as well. Here's the 508 compliance question. With the Broadcasting Board of Governors, my products are not necessarily supposed to be consumed in the United States. They're supposed to be consumed worldwide. And so I'm not beholden to 508. I don't have to do 508 compliance on the things that go out of the country. That said, I am going to critically small devices, little tiny phones and stuff. So my office always tries to make the things as accessible as possible, and they try to make the code as clean as possible so that it goes really well through narrow pipes and narrow bandwidth. I went ahead and ran the Cynthia on our circumvention site, and I came up with these 3 errors. We had not filled our alt tags, which is easy to do. Not readable without a style sheet, which is a little tough since it's responsive, and describe the structure of the page using the summary. I'm not a 508 expert, so I don't know how easy 2 and 3 are to fix, but this is all HTML. It's all code. I would think that would be fairly easy to do. I know that it's easy to fix the alt tags because, and we hadn't really talked about this, as a starting off and getting a buy-in from your boss and various stakeholders, you are going to want to write a script for your comic, especially if you're talking with an illustrator from if you don't have illustrators on hand. You will write a script. It'll look a little bit like this, where in each panel you'll have a description of what's happening in the panel. You'll tell people who's in the panel and what they're saying. And if you think about it, this reads like a little bit like a radio script, and I would think that if you were to give people a redirect to this HTML page, it would be totally 508 compliant. Or if you want to go ahead and fill the alt tags of your code, you should just be able to cut and paste right from your script, which is what you're using, and it's a tool, and you already have it. So that's my touchstone on 508 compliance, which I promised last time I did a presentation I would do. Resources. So all of the code used in this presentation is available at GitHub. This is all open source. It's all open and there for you to work at. If you go ahead and find something that we haven't done or you want to add to it, GitHub's a great place to collaborate. We're happy to have you work on things. Resources. So for power users, if you think this was too easy, here's a resource for you. So comics is a complicated problem. People have approached it in a couple of different ways. If this solution that we're talking about is not your solution, you might actually try this. This is a different way of looking at comics. It was actually put together by some developers over at Al Jazeera. So there's samples and there's tools and there's everything that you need to experiment with this particular comic process. Resources. Small Press Expo, if you're in Washington, D.C., will be coming to Bethesda this September from the 19th to the 20th. There are basically, it's a national show that comes here, and there are going to be hundreds of small press cartoonists, writers, all in one room talking about comics and speaking about all things comic book related. So if you wanted to make if you were just interested or you wanted to go ahead and make contacts, this would be a really good place to go, and it's coming up in September. The people who put together the Unusual History of Washington, D.C., the book that I talked about earlier, turns out they're local. It's called DC Conspiracy. I'm sure that the Comics Collective will be at the Small Press Expo, but they also have a Tumblr if you're interested in talking with them. Be a good resource possibly for artists and or people who eat, sleep, and breathe comics. And then finally, the government printing office, I know, has illustrators on staff. It's probably one of the few places in D.C. or in the federal government that does have illustrators on staff, and you can certainly use their resources. They're very good people over there. More reading. So if you're looking for a good summer book, in fact, if you're going to read any book about communications at all this year and you haven't read Understanding Comics, The Invisible Art by Scott McCloud. You've got to read this book. It's a spectacular book. It's about comics, but it's really all about communications. It's about reaching audiences. It's about communicating, and it's a really spectacular book. It's an easy read. There are a number of comics in it. I really highly recommend it. If you're going to get interested really into the nitty-gritty, there's graphic storytelling with a visual narrative by Will Eisner. So Will Eisner actually drew some of the government comics that are in the book below, Government Issue Comics for the People. He's a brilliant man. He's sort of the man who's considered to have invented the graphic novel. So if you're going to take lessons from anybody, Will Eisner would be the person. And then finally, Government Issue Comics for the People by Richard Graham. I include this last because it's got a lot of old comics from the 1950s that possibly might not be the best model. They are all really interesting, and it's very, very fascinating to see what the government paid for long ago. And so, like I said, when your boss scratches his head when you talk about comics, you can say, wow, it's been going on for 60 years, and I've got a whole book full of them. And that's pretty much all I have for the formal presentation. There's my contact information, and hopefully we'll have some questions.
Yes, we do, Steve. Thanks for that. That was a great presentation. I learned a lot there. Let me start with this one. I work at the CDC. We have a few illustrators on staff. We did the this is a comment that somebody's sending to us, and we did the Zombile graphic novel a few years back. And somebody wants you to go back to, let me just read this, the resources that has a URL that starts GitHub. She wants to grab that, if we can just run back there.
Sure.
Real quick. Okay. This will be up on YouTube, so you can go back and listen to it and capture any other information. Okay.
Yeah, so here's the GitHub for the BBG stuff. And then there's one more for the tough one, the power user one.
Okay. All right, so I'll leave that there for a second, and then we'll just jump into some questions here, Steve. I know you've been doing this for a while now. What's the one thing that you wish you'd known up front when you started out doing this that would have saved you a lot of headaches?
Well, it's all a matter of preparing, really. I think it was hard to imagine that we would spend as much time actually doing the graphics. But as long as you go ahead and put the resources in, I think it's well worthwhile, because uniformly all of these products have been very well received. Because I do prototypes, I don't always get. I'm supposed to do the first of, and then sometimes we try to turn it into something that's a production model. But that's always the tricky thing with my office is we do the first of. Get a glimmer of a positive feedback from our clients or our audience, and then we'll go ahead and try to turn those prototypes into production models. So it just takes a lot longer than you think to do the illustrations and stuff.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of times that comics are better for more complex stories. Why is that? Is it just because they take longer to produce, so you're looking for a longer lead time? Go ahead.
I think it's because you have the option of describing something or illustrating something either visually or with words. And this is not the great age of illustration was in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. I think a lot of times people take a photograph and hope for the best and think that will explain things, but it really is the illustration working with the text that in a good comic really makes a good comic a good comic.
Right.
It's the marriage of the two.
Yeah, and so if you were using photographic images, are there special formats or considerations that you need to look at?
You can certainly do comics with word balloons and photographs. I would I would actually start with the smallest possible format with the photographs and make sure that your photographs are going to read small on a phone. And if you were doing this 6-column grid, I would make sure that they were going to go ahead and work and be legible on the small phone, because it's very easy to take a photograph that when it reduces turns to nothing.
So you shared the script with us and use that as one of the tips for getting buy-in from management. But because the panels shift around so much, I'm assuming that placement of those things is very important. So do you actually storyboard that out before you even write a script?
I think the storyboard and the script have to work together. I don't see them not working one way or the other. So, I mean, a script is great because it has the final words, but a script would always go with a storyboard. And actually, I'm sorry if I gave the impression that you could have a script without a storyboard. You can't really. Because even if you have, I don't know, Post-it notes with little drawings on it, those are the things that you would need to kind of scope things out. And actually, by the way, a script with Post-it notes on a whiteboard is actually a great way to work up a story, because you can move panels around, and it gives you a lot of flexibility in telling the story and maybe flipping things around, especially when you're explaining different things. Like, for instance, during this presentation, I mean, there was a choice between talking about what happened on the individual panels and talking about how the individual panels moved. And I wasn't really sure which I should do, but I ended up talking about how the individual panels moved, because that's what makes responsive storytelling with a comic book responsive storytelling, because these things move.
Right, right. I have a question here from Michael. When might a video, an animated comic with audio narration, be more effective? Well, I would have to go back to my mandate. My mandate is to go ahead and work on small, narrow-banded phones. So comics work well because it's a marriage of images and text, and it doesn't take a whole lot of bandwidth up. I will say, I mean, you think that we spend a fair amount of time drawing comics, but I think for animation, full-fledged animation, you're going to be spending thousands of dollars a second. I mean, on that side. So I think it's probably cheaper, I would think, to do a comic. Okay. And, I was looking at various studies, and the comics, the illustrated version appeals to everyone from millennials to baby boomers. Why do you think that is? Is it because we've all got kids, a child heart inside?
I think it's easier for people to look at a cartoon and imagine themselves as the cartoon as opposed to photos. And I think it's something about cartooning and the appeal of cartooning, because basically what you're doing is you're taking human beings, which are complicated. They've got like eyebrows and lips and ears and nostrils, and you're basically turning them into a circle, 2 dots, and a squiggly line for a mouth. I mean, I think it really gets into why cartoons appeal to us. They're sort of universal, and everybody can see themselves in them.
Right, right. And I know we've got Brian Williamson standing by. Thank you, Brian, in case anybody had technical questions. So I just wondered if we could ask Brian what's the #1 tip from a technical perspective that he'd give to somebody who's designing this kind of comic story.
Here's Brian.
Hi, thank you. #1 technical tip. I think once we had kind of created the CSS and to make the comics responsive, we really kind of solved a lot of our technical challenges. So I think for someone producing comics, this kind of allows you to focus more on sort of the storyboarding process, which is and the writing, which is really, I think, probably most important. For us, because of the translation needs, because of the need to collaborate with journalists throughout the building. The ability to work with using Google spreadsheets was really helpful. And for that, we're using a JavaScript library called Tabletop.js, which allows you to, after people have, or while people are collaborating on a spreadsheet, to then publish that out as a JSON feed that then we can use to populate the different speech bubbles and panels.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, Brian. Thanks for standing by. Appreciate your time today. And Steve, I want to come back to you and just say thank you so much for giving us such a great presentation today. You really shared a lot of information there, and I'm sure people will find that really helpful. So thank you for being with us, Stephen Fuchs. Appreciate your time.
You're quite welcome.
And so we're finished a little early because Steve was really efficient with getting so much information out there, so that's good. Gift of time. And before we go, in case you're wondering how Aquent Federal can help you or your team on any of your projects, it's super easy to work with Aquent Federal. You can do so through any of the programs listed here. There's also a link at the bottom of this slide which will take you directly to, it's not hot links, but you can copy it down and it will take you directly to the contracting vehicles that you need to work with Aquent Federal. And we also have a, you can see here some of the clients that we currently work with within the federal government. And we have a dedicated resource for you. Lee Andrews is Vice President of Aquent Federal. And she's been doing this a long time. She's an expert in her business. She is more than happy to take any questions about today's presentation or about Aquent Federal in general and how they partner with government agencies and leaders. And this is how you can reach her. I'll read out the phone number just in case anyone is not looking at the screen, 410-975-4183, 410-975-4183. And you can also email her at landrews@aquent.com, and she's on Twitter also. And I mentioned earlier that you can find us on YouTube. Just type in Aquent Federal. We've got a half dozen other presentations up there, and this will go up probably tomorrow. So if you want to catch it again, it will be up on YouTube under Aquent Federal channel. Well, I want to thank you for being with us today. If you found today's story interesting and helpful, then please share it with a friend or a colleague. Tell them where they can find it. And enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. We hope you'll join us next time.